Welcome to Retreat Affairs. This is your host, Sasha Kaus. I'm super happy that you have found the podcast. If you're hearing this, you're listening to our free feed that will only feature partial episodes of the podcast. If you're interested in the full conversation and all content, you'll need to subscribe at retreataffairs.com, where you will get access to the full recording and a private RSS feed that you can add to your favorite podcatcher, and will be able to access other subscriber-only content. I never want money to be the reason why you can't listen to the podcast. So if you can't afford a membership, there's an option at retreataffairs.com to request a free account, and I grant 100% of those requests. No questions asked. Hi friends! In this episode of the Retreat Affairs podcast, I welcome Anthony Abbagnano. You find Anthony on Facebook /aob.breathwork, on Instagram at Alchemy of Breath, and on his website, alchemyofbreath.com. I'm so proud and humbled to have Anthony on the show. Anthony is the founder of Alchemy of Breath. He's one of the most inspiring breathwork teachers that you'll find out there. Anthony has brought the power of the breath to countless people around the world. The dedication that Anthony puts into his work is mind-blowing. After many years in Bali, where he started giving breathwork sessions to an ever-growing group of people, he took his work online, way before the pandemic hit and everybody was going on Zoom. This is one of the cornerstones that made Anthony build an online community with 40,000 people that is continuously growing. Anthony offers weekly free breathwork sessions that are attended by hundreds of people around the world. There are free online events and courses where Anthony and his team guide you through transformational topics. He runs multiple facilitator trainings per year, and until the lockdown, he held workshops all over the world. Anthony is truly unstoppable. His latest project is reviving an abandoned retreat center in southern Tuscany in Italy. This is where he wants to create a place for the community that he built over the past few years. About 3 years ago, a friend of mine told me about Anthony, and thanks to synchronicity, I was introduced to him a few months later in Ibiza, where we both lived at the time. So I got curious and attended my first breathwork session in the breath camp Anthony was holding in Ibiza. Breathing with about 60 to 80 people in one room was a powerful experience and gave me many insights. I returned for a few consecutive days. And connecting to my breath in the way Anthony teaches was one of the most profound spiritual experiences of my life so far. In the following year, I decided to join Anthony in his breathwork facilitator training to be able to share this beautiful practice with others. What I learned was much more than another skill. It was a personal transformation, a kind of psychotherapy, and it helped me to uncover many old and buried imprints. I love this episode because Anthony is a great storyteller. He's a wise soul who has tapped into the manifold expressions of human existence and play, and he's a thoughtful leader. It's always inspiring to listen to his teachings and hearing what he has achieved and what he still wants to accomplish, and how he puts his life at service is motivating on many levels. Without further ado, please welcome Anthony Abbagnano. Anthony, welcome to the show. It's such a pleasure to have you here with me.
Yeah, it's just great to be with you again and to serve it any way I can. What you're doing is an honor. So I'm very, very glad to be here. Grateful.
Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time. Why don't we take a moment and just take a deep breath together? Because this is really what connects us and what has been connecting us so far so deeply. Yeah, that feels different. I have to be honest, there's still a kind of excitement every time I do an interview, and it's all quite new. So I'm always feeling a little bit nervous in the beginning, and then it's so good to have that moment to connect, to breathe, and be with my guests.
Yeah.
So, as you know, or as I told you, the podcast is all about retreats and people who dedicate their lives towards creating spaces where transformation can happen, where people can come together. And what's connecting us is the breath and the beautiful way that you bring breath into the life of so many. But before we go into this, there's also a part of you that seems to be an adventurer in many aspects of life. There seems to be an entrepreneur within you and a man of many talents and explorations. Can you tell us a little bit more, and our listeners who haven't heard of you before or who haven't met you before, a little bit where you're coming from and, in a few words, your life story?
Well, I am English-Italian. I was brought up in England, but I've lived in Italy for more time than in England and spent many years in Asia. And I think from a very young age, I was troubled by existential issues. It seemed the measure of compliance that was required from me in order to not get into some kind of trouble was daunting, because it seemed like the way people wanted me to be wasn't the way it was meant to be. So there was some kind of early wisdom that I clearly brought with me from my wherever I had been before, and things didn't sit well. And at the same time, I was heavily conditioned. I was put into boarding school at a very young age of 7, and was educated alongside ministers and future prime ministers and kings and things. But I didn't fit in. It still didn't work for me. I was deeply disturbed and was looking to a future of, as my father would have wished, either joining the military or becoming a banker. And that was perhaps enough to make me scuttle out of boarding school, having taken my exams, and get married as soon as I possibly could to someone from the other side of the world. So I moved to America when I was 18 and escaped the legacy that was waiting for me. And as a young parent also at the age of 19, and then a single parent at the age of 20, survival became pretty key. How could I protect this little one and be functional in the world? And that kind of took me out of my spiritual being for some years, that struggle of having to contend with the nastiness of the world as I perceived it. And that eventually led me back. In my mid-20s, I began my spiritual search again. I'd sort of abandoned it at 19 when I got separated, but a very, very deep spiritual questioning that I'd had in my teens, and also experimentation with psychedelics. And then in my mid-20s, I began to study with Krishnamurti, and I'd go listen to him talking in Brockwood Park in England, and started my yoga practice quite deeply, and studied with a wonderful guy called Danny Paradise, and we travelled together a little bit, both internally and sometimes externally as well, and so during those years of survival, I learned to, when I said I learned to function in this world, it meant the skills I was given in my education, even though I wasn't quite appreciative of them as I could have been, they did help me engage with the material world. So my drive for survival became a drive to thrive, and I became quite successful in the business world. In my early 30s, I moved back to Italy and started to work with old buildings and architecture and restoring them and designing. And we ended up with one of the largest companies that was doing this work in Italy. And so for 15 or 20 years, I celebrated some success, and at the same time, a gnawing pain in my soul that this was one foot. I had one foot in this life, but my other foot wanted to be clearly in the ethereal realms and in the realms of the soul. And so I knew that this would have a lifespan, and as long as my son needed me, I kept doing it. But then after he grew up and left home, I pretty quickly moved to India, and I went there for 3 or 4 years and meditated. And then I moved to Bali, where I continued for another 3 or 4 years to meditate and didn't really engage with anything at all in the outer world. And so that period of my life was really the transition, highlighted by a couple of big illnesses that were to do with parasites, but were great teachers to me. And so I came out of that period quite clear as to what my life needed to be in order to feel that I'd met my purpose in some way. And that's really when I started to work to contribute to the healing of this planet. It started with a little restaurant in Bali, in Ubud, called Alchemy, and then the alchemy actually began, really, in many other ways too. So that then became Alchemy of Breath about 9 years ago, and since then I've been teaching all over the world and holding this space for people's transformation, for them to have the deepest experience that they may, in order to become stronger and more resilient in a challenging world.
While you were taking care of your son and working in the business realm, did you still have some kind of spiritual practice? Did you still have the possibility to feel or stay connected to what you've experienced before?
I mean, in my inner world, I was, but I think my feeling at the time was that I'd betrayed that. I'd actually stepped away from it, and my perhaps fear-based motivation about wanting to protect him and to provide for him, it closed off my vision of my spiritual life. I was also, around his birth and in his first 3 years of life, with the separation from his mother, there was a very deep and powerful experience I had with being inducted into a cult, and I had to escape eventually and rescue him. And that was a very challenging period of my life where I think I felt a sense of betrayal from my partner who'd led me, we definitely co-explored together, and then she left to join this cult, and I went back. I went to visit in order to see my son, and that's when I was then kept under lock and key for some period of time while it was referred to at the time as brainwashing, but where they induce you to join, and it becomes a very compelling process that they take you through of underfeeding you, undersleeping you, keeping you accompanied, love bombing it was called at the time. And after that escape, I was cauterized spiritually. There was no way I was going to open. I was extremely closed. So there was probably a 3 to 5 year period where I was just not able to even entertain the idea of it because the wound was so deep. That's when I started to study Krishnamurti, and I began to understand things in a different way about the power of not necessarily believing, and not and people's and understanding the human need to believe, and how willing we are as humans, that part of us that wants to hand over our responsibility to somebody else. So it was still a useful, fertile period of reflection for me, but it also meant forsaking any idea. I don't even want to talk about my spirit. I need just to protect it. And And that was by dissociation, is how it worked in that moment.
Tell me a little bit about those first encounters with Krishnamurti. Like, what was the set and setting? Like, how did you experience him, and what did it bring into your life?
They were beautiful encounters. I'm not sure, at the time, I think I was 24 when I started to read about Krishnamurti, and that was thanks to Danny, who introduced him to me. But in retrospect, it was the only way that I could. It's the only way I could be willing to re-encounter the concept of spirituality. Because it was because it felt like I was encouraged to be skeptical, and that was fundamental to me, the ability to be discerning, not to suspend my critical factor. So that's what my experience with Krishnamurti was all about, was learning how to discern and learning how to really think very deeply, and also understand the limit of thinking, and to be able to be able to really experientially understand that the thinking mind is such a limited tool, and therefore to begin to want to explore what was between thoughts, what lay underneath the thinking process. And that then took me eventually into somatic awareness and the breath. So they were very important stepping stones for me. So I think the biggest takeaway for me with Krishnamurti was the distrust of whatever my mind was telling me, and the ability to connect to people underneath what they're saying, underneath the words. Now I've arrived at the point where I find words are even risky at all. They're risky things to use. And it's really from our being that we are communicating all the time. And so to deconstruct those early years and to reveal the beauty of the statue that lies underneath the surface of the stone, like Michelangelo said, really allows us to reveal who we are, and that's really how we can best communicate as human beings. It's just by our own becoming, our own richest being that we can be.
And how has this experience shaped your approach towards bringing spirituality in the lives of others, like having this kind of experience of being somehow turned away from spirituality and then finding it again?
Yeah, I think it was fundamental. I mean, it was without it, I could have just stayed in the material world, and yet, even though during those years in the business world, it was always a thread. There was always a thread of disbelief in what I was doing. I think that was how I kept my sanity, and that's how I was able to leave it. I remember members of my family saying, "God, you work so hard. You're never available. You don't see us anymore. You don't call. You don't come by." And I said, "Well, one day it'll stop." And they said, "No, it won't. You're a workaholic. You'll never stop." And how shocked they were the day I said, "Okay, that's it. I've had enough." And I moved to India. And I don't think I could have unless I'd had that experience with Krishnamurti, because that business world, especially at that time, was devoid of largely devoid of consciousness. There were very few people who were conscious entrepreneurs. It was based on that paradigm of, in order for me to get something, you have to lose something, which is thankfully now being increasingly abandoned by business. People are beginning to understand there's a better way, that we can all survive and thrive, and that money is an impersonal energy that actually belongs to us all. It's not that I can take it away from anybody, and that I can actually contribute to other people having it as a result of my having it. So it's a complete rewrite of the credo that there used to be in the old paradigm. And without Krishnamurti, I don't think I could have kept a thread on that. So as much as I was successful in the business world, I was able to laugh at it. It was like, yeah, right, this is pretty shallow stuff. But at the same time, I need to do this right now.
And then turning back to the spiritual world, or like opening up again to the spiritual world, and at some point becoming someone who shares the spiritual knowledge and experience with others. How did it feel to become sort of a spiritual teacher and leader yourself after having experienced this kind of like the cult that you were talking about?
I am so grateful for that experience, because it informed me of all the things not to do. But that said, a cult has some things to learn from it too. The word culture, the root of the word culture is cult. So if we want to redescribe our culture, if we want to create a new culture, then we have to perhaps look at some parts of that experience and see which of them might be beneficial. But I think the biggest effect that it had on me was to always shy away from the guru figure. That's not my thing. My vision is for each person to find the guru inside them, and not to project their need to believe onto anybody else. And I think that was, again, the gift I got from Krishnamurti. And the other one was to discover solitude, because from the age of 25, it took me until I was 55 before I was able to move into a role of teaching. And that period was a very lonely one, because most other people were too ready to believe in something already. So we had Osho in those days, and I had many friends who were involved with Osho and all the other spiritual, like Guru Maharaji and everybody, other people were going to India and having gurus. And I was quite lonely in that situation. I was the only person who wasn't adhering to a belief system. I used to tell myself I don't have one, until a wise woman once told me that if you don't have one, then that is your belief system. So I got to reevaluate even that. But that sense of not being able to subscribe to someone else's thesis or theology was very lonely and solitary. And so that transformation for me of having to feel still like the odd one out, which had always been my life experience, and here I was opting to do that again, and that enabled me to, I think I put it like this, it was like it's only through the corridors of loneliness that I could reach the strength of solitude, and understanding that solitude is my sovereignty, and it's my home base, and it's my inner guru. And then I can bring to work that I do, that's what I bring. It's just that's who I am. So if that works for you, then that's wonderful. And I don't really ask you to believe in me. That's not my need at all. In fact, I kind of have to deflect that a little bit with my work, that people would enjoy the idea of believing in me. So then I've always been interested in building community. It's always been a drive of mine, and I've done it 3 or 4 times in different stages of my life. And so now, as I'm doing it in this iteration that we're doing right now with our community center here in Italy, I couldn't find the right words as to what leadership would look like. What would leadership look like in order to relate with the following that we develop as leaders or spiritual teachers, whatever the word is, and not sit on the golden cushion and have incense burning around us and have people adorn us with their need to adorn us with the jewels of their own lack. Because I find that really disempowering, and I find it really dangerous, and I see it happening all the time, and that bothers me. So I wanted to stand for something that was different than that. And I remember once about 8 years ago, I got up at 4:00 in the morning, and I was like very disturbed. And I'd been talking about creating a community in Bali, and we'd had a couple of meetings, and it was an initiative we'd begun. And I started to ask questions. I wrote down a question like, what am I doing here? And the answers started to come through my hand as I wrote. And so I ended up calling this my conversation with God. But the message that came out of it for me over a series of 3 nights where I woke up at 4 a.m. and I just couldn't sleep. And I started to write. And the message was that you are a leader. It's time for you to accept that. And how can you do it in the most humble way possible? So I thought of terms like, I don't know, benign dictatorship, or, how could I describe the softness of who I am as a human being, the pliability and the porousness that I am as a human being, a sensitive being, and at the same time have the strength to stand up for who I am. And it wasn't until just a few years ago that a dear friend said, I think what you're talking about is servant leadership. And then I was able to, I Googled it immediately, and I found a YouTube, and I went, oh God, that feels so good. It feels so good to understand what it is that I've been trying to name and trying to describe about the way I feel. And that really is the way I feel, that as leaders we establish we have a gift, and if we don't allow that gift to be contaminated by egotistical or egoic self, then we can use that gift to catalyze, and we can catalyze people in a common goal. And then it's our task to serve them in reaching that in their inner world too. So that leadership is just a moment, and then the rest of it is bowing to people's courage and spirit and will to actually make a change in their lives. And that's the way it works for me, and it feels like a wonderful regenerative cycle.
Let me just get back to the time when you've been restoring old buildings in Italy. Restoring something that's broken with probably, I don't know, have you done it on your own, or have you done it with a group of people? You said like one of the biggest construction company. I assume that there have been many other peoples involved. Did you see yourself in those times also as a sort of leader?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. A different kind of leadership, but definitely, yeah. And a very similar thing, a common belief, that because it sounds like a bit mundane and material, but actually when you deal with someone who has, I don't know, saved up their money their whole lives, or has inherited money from someone they loved, and they want to create a new life, you're actually dealing with a dream, and so there's a great sensitivity to it. I remember one of the first questions I would ask people when they came to look for a house is, what is it you'd like to feel as you sit on your terrace in the evening looking at the sunset or dawn or whatever it is that moves you most? What is it you want to feel about it? And so I was already in the feeling realms. I think that's probably one of the reasons we were so successful, because we met people in their emotional being and helped them not just repair the building, but to bridge the gap between the life that they had in that moment and the life they really wanted to have for themselves. So that was quite a journey. I actually remember in the first, this is a risky story to say on a podcast. May I say it anyway?
You're free.
I have a really good friend that I did a lot of inner work with in my 20s. And he came back from California in 1985, I think. And he came back with 500 capsules of ecstasy. And this was before the days of raving or anything like that. And this was just when I was beginning to take on houses and show them to people. And we would do deep inner work. We would take ecstasy 3 or 4 times a week, and we would sit by the fire and really think about what we were creating, who were we attracting to this idyllic place in Umbria, in Italy, and how did we want to protect it from the wrong kinds of influences. And that very much informed the business that time. In fact, even once in a while we would take ecstasy and then meet the clients, and I can't imagine what they would have thought of us. But the ones that needed to come came, and it was a very loving, caring experience. So, and that was really how that business began, was from the heart. It really was a heartfelt creation of community. That's what the idea was. I had no idea we'd end up with 300 people working for us and 35 different construction sites, and but it was a great thing for the area to see all those buildings renewed, and yet somehow didn't nourish the soul. It wasn't enough for me. I wanted more than that.
I mean, listening to this story or this episode from your life, and I'm totally fine like telling this on the podcast. I also have my experiences with psychoactive substances, and it sounds like this has been like a kind of retreat that you've been taking for yourself. So during those days, and also how you've described it before, I mean, you grew up and lived in a time that saw like one of like the first big wave of spiritual encounters in the West, of spiritual teachings coming to the West. So even though you have been working in this kind of business environment, was there something that you consider to be a retreat, that you've gone on retreats, taking time off to think about like the deeper meaning of life or anything like this?
Absolutely. I lived in, it was 10 kilometers of dirt road to my house while I was doing all of this. So I lived in retreat. Human design says that I'm a hermit role model. And just to complicate matters, I'm also a Gemini. So the opposites of those two realities were one where I would go out and greet people, but then I would need to be in retreat. And indeed, I used the money I was making to open my first retreat center in Italy. That would have been back in 1990, something like that, 1990. Yeah. And, oh my goodness, what a disaster. What a disaster that was.
How did that happen? Like, what was the idea behind this?
Well, it was much stimulated by Danny, because Danny was teaching. He was an Ashtanga yoga teacher, still is today, and he would travel the world and gather groups. And so he said one day, why don't you put, because I was working on this house that I lived in the middle of nowhere, and grazing my own knuckles with my son, with Damien, my firstborn son. We were doing the work together, and so he said, well, I can come there and teach. It was such an idyllic place. He said, I'll come and do a yoga course there. So I sort of scrambled and threw it together, and we had this wonderful experience that was led by him. And then we started to do more Ashtanga yoga retreats there, and then I had a dear friend who taught shiatsu, so we started with shiatsu retreats. And so actually what had happened is I dishonored my need for hermitage and started bringing people to this place. And so my whole world of retreat, my own personal retreat, was completely sacrificed in order for other people to come on retreat. And so that was number one lesson, is, if you can't take care of yourself, then don't think that you can run a retreat. That's a moment that I managed to live. But and then the other thing that I realized is that bless all of us, sweet souls, as humans that we are, but as retreat center owners, we also need to be aware that we're going to attract people that are in need. So that's a real clear reminder of how we need to be resourcing ourselves, that care for the caretaker, in order to be able to offer anything to anyone else. And so that understanding of my own inner work is really the only way through which I can be of true service to the world, began back then for me. Because I thought it was like, oh, I'll just do everything I can for people. I just want to help people. And there's some discernment necessary in that process as well. It's not that simple at all.
So I guess those retreats happened probably like before the dawn of the internet. Am I right? Like, how did you get the people there? Like, how did this happen that people came together?
All word of mouth. But I mean, you live in Umbria or Tuscany, and our retreat center now is here in Tuscany, and we're favored. We're very lucky. It's a bit like being in Bali. Everybody wants to go to Bali. So we used to work through the retreat leaders themselves who had a following, and they would bring them all the way down that driveway. They would bring them, So the internet changed all of that for sure. Yeah.
Okay, and then all the way to Bali. How did you end up in Bali? How did you go to Bali?
Well, I'd been in India for about 4 years by then, and I was looking for a place to settle, and my partner and I, we were both looking for a place to settle, and it definitely wasn't going to be Italy, because I'd had my share of that and needed to leave. And so we thought we'd travel around the world one time to see where it was that would appeal to us. And actually Maui and the big island of Hawaii were the ones that we thought would be our favorites. So anyway, we went around to several different countries, Thailand and in Europe and in the US, and South America too, in Costa Rica. And then we thought, well, let's go via Bali on the way home just in case. And so we just went there for 10 days, and that's where I stayed for, I think, 12 and a half years I stayed in Bali, and opened a retreat center there too. Bali's kind of like that, it used to be like that.
So you arrived and didn't leave for 12 years?
Well, I came back to Europe once in a while because I still had my company here. So I was still coming back to motivate all my people and to try and keep it all together. And I couldn't, of course. So my interests were really were not in doing that. So I kind of let it slow down into a full stop. But yeah, we stayed in Bali. And the thing about Bali is you understand quite quickly, experience on a cellular level, that, wow, there really doesn't seem to be any reason to leave. And it's like that absence of a reason to leave becomes compelling to stay. It's an extraordinary place. It's a vortex and a very powerful place to do inner work. So super attractive for that. And the people are of a just delightful nature. The indigenous people are great teachers. So, Bali happened for 12 years.
So when was the first time you came there?
Oh my goodness, that would be 2004, something like that. 2000. Actually, before that, I'd visited once before. But this in the late 90s, so this would be about early 2000s, somewhere in there.
And so you abandoned your retreat center in Italy and then created a new one in Bali.
I didn't abandon the one in Italy, I have to say. I did manage to sell it very well, so that actually gave me the money to keep going. But
so is it still the place in Italy? Is it still a retreat center?
No, it's a private home now. It's a beautiful private home. And the one in Bali is still a retreat center, although they're suffering right now. They've had to close until October, so it's
What's the one in Bali called?
It's called the Ark, which is actually a play on the Alchemy Retreat Center, because I had the restaurant and then this was down the road, and so but it's with a K instead. It's called the Ark.
I have to say I've been there. I've actually been there without really knowing that you started it. And I've been there like a year and a half ago because a very amazing lady, Sarah Britton, who runs an incredible vegan blog, who I used to follow all the time for inspiration. She did a retreat there and we just bumped into each other. I told her that I'm like a big fan. And I ended up doing a little video there. How
perfect. Yeah, it's a very special little place.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Sweet. I loved it a lot. So when you opened that retreat center, was it also about yourself already teaching, sharing your knowledge, or was it more about bringing in others to share and teach?
Well, actually, this one honestly was driven by my now wife, who at that time was a very good friend. And we were friends for, I think, 5 years before we became a couple. And during that 5 years, I saw that she needed one. And I just cared for her so much that the house, the two houses that we had, the property that we had, then kind of grew. And I was going to make it into a beautiful home, but I could see that she wanted to do this. So we built the group room there and we started to enlarge the kitchen. And so it was an organic process over 3 or 4 years. And then the idea was to just host teachers. I don't think I'd fully, back in those days, embraced my own form of service. I hadn't fully embraced it. I wasn't ready. So it was really deferred onto other people who could be there and be teachers, and Amy was one of them. So that was the purpose. Again, in whole creating a space for people. That's been a consistent thing in my life, is always to create spaces for people to heal the soul.
And how did you start to explore your own ability of sharing wisdom and knowledge?
Well, I think so much of this is unconscious. There comes a point where there certainly did for me, and I encourage anybody who feels a little lackluster or depressed or feeling a pointlessness in life. But I do believe there's a point in life where we suddenly we become aware of how every experience we've had, even though it appeared to be contrary to what we might have thought was right or what we wanted, how they all kind of just come together in this soup, and out comes the best meal you ever ate. I don't know if you've ever experienced that when you've cooked something with what's left. Sometimes, gosh, the meal is like, oh God, I wish I'd remembered what I put in there because I could do that. That'd be famous, And so I think for me it was that moment, and also the illnesses that I had, which were all parasite driven, and reduced me to a pretty bad state. That I understood that with whatever time I've got left, it's actually, I can harvest effortlessly everything that I've done, all the choices that I've made, all the studies that I've made, because I've been going to workshops for 25 or 30 years, and all the wisdom that I'd ever read, because I was an avid reader and I was into Jungian psychology and the study of miracles and hypnotherapy and all kinds of different traditions and practices and disciplines. And gosh, here they all were, and here am I, and people want me. I don't quite know how to describe that, but people wanted me. People would come up and ask me for advice, or if I could go talk to them, or there's a group thing happening we're doing here, would you come and talk to? And I was really from this surprising reflection from the outer world that I understood that, there's obviously something that to me is completely undescribable, because it's just who I am. I mean, it's just normal, but to other people there's something exceptional here. So maybe I need to own that. Maybe I need to own the fact that that can be of use, rather than to stay in denial of that. So there was a pivotal moment there of understanding that, and the last word I would have used would be leader or teacher. because I'm just me, really, you know, and I'm here to help, to do what I can. So I'm a little reluctant to take that role of spiritual teacher. It's not really, you know, I'm just speaking, and if it lands, then I hope it can help.
I find it really interesting, an interesting topic, and I would just like to dive a little deeper into this. Like, how important do you feel, or what has it meant for yourself? You've talked about being a hermit, being in solitude. I heard you talking about being an outsider in many other different occasions, and then also like, okay, seeing it for yourself, but allowing others to see you, or allowing yourself to be seen. And I feel it's something that also comes up in your workshops again and again. Like, how do you relate to that?
Well, now it seems very simple in retrospect. We are seen. No matter how much we want to hide about ourselves, we're still seen. And so what if we take that as an invitation to be conscious about what's being seen rather than being unconsciously seen and witnessed? You know, it just becomes a personal choice. Does that answer your question?
A little. So what part of yourself didn't want to be seen before you actually allowed yourself to go out there?
The part that didn't belong, the part of me that wasn't worthy, the part of me that was an outcast. I don't know, maybe you were there in that group where I asked how many people in the group are outcasts, and everybody puts up their hand, and then I would say, well, look at each other just for a moment, and people would kind of look at each other, and then they'd start laughing, because we realize that we are actually incast. You know, we're not outcast. We're here together. And that willingness to exist as an outcast gives us such gifts of observation and opportunity to reflect. As we are not part of the conversation, we can begin to ask questions. And I think those are privileges. They end up being privileges that end up putting us in the same room where we can say we've been outcast before, but actually we really not just belong, but we super belong. We belong in an opportunity to help all those other people that still feel like they're outcasts. So do we stay indulgent and wallow in the sense of being an outcast, or do we awaken to the opportunity that's there to help all those other people just by showing who we are, all those other people who feel like they don't belong and that they're not worthy.
So when did you actually start to show more of that? Like, what was the pivotal point to actually go out there and feel it for yourself, that there's something special that you have to share?
Well, truthfully, this happened a long time ago. This was like when I was 15 or 16. This sort of thing began to happen, that I was given labels that didn't feel like they fit, but I was still given labels as a great communicator. I even just 2 weeks ago realized, as I was teaching in class, we were teaching about the birth types and how our different birth types affect us. And I just realized as I spoke that I was a cesarean, and one of the principal things that I teach now is the importance of being able to feel, because I was anesthetized when I was born. So my part of my human journey is getting people to awaken to their feelings again, because that's what I did. That's what I had to do. So in many ways, this began at the year dot for me. If not before, in a soul contract, I don't know. But I think the pivotal moment for me was my illness, when I was bedridden and unable to move for a few months, and And then I realized the only thing that I could do was to breathe. I couldn't move for pain. And so I had to breathe for probably about 7 or 8 weeks just to watch my breathing.
What kind of illness was this?
It was from parasites. I was invaded by parasites that I got in Bali, and but acutely, and I was in the last stages. It's lethal, and I was close to leaving, and in the battle with the medical world, who wanted to call it something else. Nobody could find out what it was, and so on. But those weeks of breathing were like were an illumination to me, and I understood that the breath was actually, if all our choices are taken away from us, the breath is perhaps the only one that's left. And so if it's the only one that's left, it's that fundamental to who I am, then what else does it mean? So it began an inquiry of a redirection of purpose for me. It actually even began the inquiry of who would I be without purpose, and understanding a lot about my ego and my human journey and what I'd been through, as I dwell on that very uncomfortable question: who would I be if I had no purpose? And it all led me to the breath. And then at that point I realized how it changed everything. It took me several weeks, but I'm so happy to see that it takes other people maybe 45 minutes or an hour, and they can have those understandings about themselves when they breathe consciously.
And how can I imagine, like, when did you go out for the first time and shared the breath with others?
Well, I'd experienced breathwork a lot already. I'd practiced pranayama in my 20s, and I'd explored Sufi breathing and holotropic breathwork and transformational breath and rebirth. Goodness, whenever I tried it, I was staggered by its power. But I never had any idea that this. Even when in my teens, I was teaching my wife how to breathe in order to give birth. We were using the Le Boyer system. So. But I never knew that this was a trail of events that actually there was a connection between this to take me where I am now. But I think actually what happened was I was running a writing workshop in Ubud in Bali, and I met this wonderful woman who was teaching breathwork, and she'd just studied it, and she'd studied her level 1 or something. And so I said, well, would you like to come and do a breathwork for our writing circle? Because I think it might be really interesting to see what happens with people. So she did, and it was so powerful and so beautiful that I tumbled into love with this wonderful being. And within 2 weeks, we were in California, and I was taking the same course that she'd taken. So I started to study it a bit more seriously, and continued from that on, because I'd studied it, but never in a formal environment. But I used it in my hypnotherapy.
What was that course?
That was Clarity Breathwork. That was with 2 dear ladies, Dana and Ashana, Dana DeLong and Ashana Solaris. And so I then completed their training as quickly as I could, and began to practice. And then I furthered my training, official training, formal training with biodynamic breathwork with Giten Tonkov. And then I brought in all kinds of things, parts of holotropic, parts of Sufi breathing, parts of, all different kinds of philosophies that I'd studied. All of a sudden, they all had a place to be together. And so that's what I mean when I say it's just part of who you are. And it's just like, that was my reality. So I just brought my reality to the world and started to teach in Ubud with a weekly class at Yoga Barn, and then within a few weeks the class was full, and they couldn't give me another room because of visas, and I had to stay low profile, and we couldn't advertise. But every week the room was full, so people would get there at 6:30 in the morning for the class that began at 8:30 or something, and the room was always full. And then I was like, well, gosh, what is it that wants to happen with this? And so then I started to run the Bali Spirit Festival for Megan, which was that was the first time breathwork came, and she said, "Would you do the breathwork?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to, but I really want to bring in other teachers so people can get an experience of it, and a full rounded experience of what breathwork can be." And she said, "No, I want you to do it on your own." And I said, "No, I'm not. No, it doesn't work. I think really, if you want to serve your people should get a chance to try everything." And so she eventually said yes, and then we found the breathwork got more people than any other yoga event. Everybody wanted to do breathwork, so then it was like, oh my gosh, this is, we were getting on television and people coming to film us, and then all of a sudden it was understood that breathwork is now shifting into a new paradigm, and so that was really when breathwork started to accelerate and to gain a footing, which is now a worldwide movement. And then I had to leave Bali. So I was thinking, I remember Amy, my dear wife, saying to me, because I didn't want to leave Bali, I wanted to stay there to continue my practice because it felt so worthy. And Amy said, "You know what? I think if you leave Bali, you'll find there's a much bigger world waiting for you." And true enough, we did leave Bali about 5 years ago, 4.5 years ago now.
Why did you have to leave Bali?
Really because of illness. I couldn't keep going back just to get another parasite. At least I knew that's what it was, but I'd have to keep going back to New York to this one man who could find it and get the test and then take heavy meds. And I just realized I don't want to keep doing that. I don't want to take that risk anymore. And each time you get them, you get less resistance to them. So it's a compounded situation that's actually done some damage to me. But so I wanted to stop it. But again, it was a blessing because it meant that I had to learn how to get people to breathe without traveling, without moving so much. I had a severe intestinal condition, so even being in a room with people for an hour was sometimes challenging. I needed to go to the bathroom 20 times, in an hour. So that was super hard. And I remember in Yoga Barn, just a little anecdote, you might want to edit this one too, but I remember once I had my microphone on and so I had an assistant and I said, take over, and I ran to the loo and I forgot to turn off my microphone. So there were like 65 breathers in the room or something, getting a full audio report on every experience I was having, Oh my God, did I blush. But anyway.
It was quite an insightful session that they had.
Oh my God, yes. Far too insightful. So I did leave, and then because of that, I started then to work online. And I'd actually started teaching people how to facilitate at the same time. That was actually earlier, a couple of years before, I'd started to teach people who wanted to learn how to do this. And then I realized that people were not really, there was the part of teaching people how to become breathwork facilitator that is about the skills you need, the technical aspects and so on. But then I realized that people were actually wanting me, not, they wanted the technical aspects, but it was Anthony that they really wanted. And that really helped me understand that the message that I live is of value out there. And so then it was like, you can't ignore it. And it was back to those conversations, that writing that I'd done at 4:00 in the morning, which I'd asked about, how do you create community? Is it just handing it over to people, or is it just a bunch of well-meaning people coming together and going into chaos? Or I remember Leo Buscaglia wrote about creating community, that it goes through goodwill into chaos and ill will, and then into some kind of leadership. And the ones that stay in the fourth stage are the ones that actually can make it work. And the question that I was asking at 4:00 in the morning is, how am I supposed to lead this, or is it by committee or whatever? And the answer came back, you are the leader. never doubt that you are the leader. And if you doubt it, you're not showing up the way you can show up. It's like it's your duty. So then I understood I had to wear this label of leader, but it was also, as I said, quite reluctant. Even today, it's like the reluctant leader. And then that servant leadership thing then just made total sense. Of course, okay, yeah, I can lead this, no problem. I can do it.
And so, sort of, you had already a following in Bali, and then you had to leave, and you had to stay in contact with them.
Yeah, which I did with the internet. That's how internet breathwork began. And my students learned by the internet too. We'd meet every week for the training. It's
just interesting to see like how strong you are online. I mean, now that everybody's doing everything online, I think now that everybody knows Zoom, I got to know Zoom through you. I think so. And this is like 2 years ago. And I guess like even before, you already had all this going on online. So you had quite a sense or now understanding that there was also a need to create this.
Yeah. Yeah, I was one of Zoom's first clients. As soon as I found that platform, I was on it, and it's been a fantastic resource. In fact, what began as maybe 200 or 300 people in Bali is now, I think we just topped 50,000 people now that work with us, that breathe with us in one way or another. And I think every year we're breathing with all our facilitators now. I think this year we'll have 240 people come through the academy as students. So I think even 2 years ago it was like 65 people a year. So it's grown exponentially. And so if you figure it out, if those 240 facilitators breathe 10 people a week, that's 2,400 people a week. That's a lot of people.
So tell us a little bit more, tell our listeners a little bit more, like what do you actually do online? Like how do you breathe with people online?
Well, we see each other, first of all. I insist on that. And we open, first of all, breathwork is a potentially very powerful experience. And some people are quite happy just to breathe once in a while and have a big experience and then come back down again and continue with what they were doing before. My wish is that people understand that the breath is really our best friend and it's there to help us integrate into some of the more difficult experiences that we face in our earthly life. So it informs us in a way that we'll never get in terms of knowledge, in terms of accumulated readings or writings. It informs us in a much more spatial, much more spiritual way. So I always would encourage people to use the breath as a wonderful experience in itself, but also to ask, how can I apply this in my life afterwards? So a lot of my teaching with breathwork on the internet is workshops that might take us through different inner processes that are then embodied by using a breathwork session afterwards. So we're not just thinking about things or doing exercises together, but we're actually breathing them into the body. And something happens when we do that. It becomes more rich, it becomes more understood on an experiential level, and it gets out of the intellect and into the body. Again, of course, that's informed by Krishnamurti. My experiences with Krishnamurti, I don't trust that things can happen in the mind alone. They need to be embodied as well. So it would a session. Some sessions are really simple, like our Sunday Breathes, the Breathe the World program that we do every Sunday in the morning and in the evening, is really just about introducing breathwork to new people. It's an introductory class. It's a half-hour breathwork. It has a 15-minute introduction, and I would still always ask a question. So I would ask a question like, for example, what is your life today reflecting to you about your inner being? Or some kind of question that would be provocative and would invite people to really consider things on a deeper level. And then I'd give we'd have a little meditation on that, and then we would then go into a breath work. So that's an example of how our Sunday breathes work. Now, for example, this coming weekend, I'm doing a 3-day event we do, and these are all free events that we do for the public because we want to bring them to the breath. And so we have also something called a quantum shift event, which is a 3-day process we go through, which has a longer breath work, maybe 45 minutes or so. And we take a subject, like from fear to fierce grace, or this one is from being a victim to becoming a victor. And we take these pathways that we can take, little journeys that we can take together to help people understand how to really implement the breath in creating big shifts in their lives.
And how is the breath actually such an integral part to get out of the mind and into the body, and why is it so important?
Well, actually what happens with a conscious connected breath, and we breathe it through the mouth, and so it sounds a bit like this. And we're going to do that for half an hour or an hour. So what actually happens is that we're raising oxygen levels in the bloodstream and we're increasing blood flow in the body. But something's also happening in the brain, which is we actually decrease the oxygen to the brain. And so the frontal lobe can't quite function in its normal alpha type way that it does. And it slows down a bit, becomes a bit disorientated. We also begin to employ the other side of our brain, the right side of our brain, a bit more than we normally do. So we begin to consider things more spatially, and we have less active, entrenched neuron pathways that we're following. So it gives us an opportunity to begin to look at what might exist in the gap between thoughts. It also, because we breathe through the mouth, and we don't have to, but it's my chosen way, is because we learn to engage with our emotional being more. So if you can, anybody who's listening now can explore just taking a few breaths through your mouth and notice where the constriction point is at the back of your throat. Notice where the breath has to go through in order to come into your body, and notice how actually that's a muscle you can relax. You can actually open that more. And what happens when you do open that more, whether that brings you a sense of tenderness or vulnerability. And as you breathe through that opening in the back of your throat, you begin to realize how tender that space is, how many words have been stuck there before in your life, things you've wanted to say but held back. Think of all the no's that you've never had the courage to say. Think of all the tears that you've swallowed in this throat. And then as we begin to breathe consciously here, we begin to understand this is actually the doorway to opening to a whole other form of intelligence inside us. So on a psycho-emotional level, there's an opportunity to unblock years of stifled emotions and suppressed emotions, and those may be everything from the strongest anger to the bliss that lies behind it if we allow ourselves to feel it. So it's very much about giving permission for these emotions to be felt. It's very much about not being anesthetized like I was when I was born. So, it kind of explains a little bit of my story there too. But at the same time, we're bringing in air. And air in every religious text, the breath has huge significance. In the Quran, that's how Jesus was born, by the breath on his mother's chest. When I apply that to the Catholic faith, it kind of meets the concept of immaculate conception. That, what does immaculate conception mean? Now, I was trained to be Catholic before I got married at the age of 18, and I remember being fascinated by this concept of, hang on, I've got this horny body and I'm being told that this incredible human being was born without horniness. How did that happen? And then it was when I understood that religious text from the Quran, that excerpt from the Quran, that maybe that's what they're talking about as well, is their own version of the power of breath. And I think actually in the Bible, the breath is referred to as a divine power 28 times or something like that, a divine force. So, and we use the word inspire, right, to bring in spirit. It means to bring in spirit, but we use inspire when we feel inspired, right? We feel a sense of spirit and uplift. And of course, we also use it to say that we're breathing. You inspire and you expire. So we also use the word expire to indicate that we die, our final expiration. So something is over, something is finishing. So in this cycle of in and out breath that we just kind of don't even think about, we do it as little as possible. We only realize we're doing it when we're not doing it. And yet in every one of these cycles exists a birth and a death. And we get to practice that. From the day we have that first inhale, we get to practice it until the day we have that last exhale. And we let go of everything. So then that makes me ask questions like, what can we let go of now? What can you let go of now? That would be a great Sunday question. What is it you're going to let go of right now with this breath? And then you think of analogies like, how much furniture can you put in your bedroom before you can't fit any furniture in there anymore? And if you look at our lives, how much stuff are we going to put into our brains until we realize we can't put any more in there, that we've got 80,000 thoughts a day happening anyway, as the Buddhists say. So what if we use our breath to consciously clean out the clutter with that exhale, and we make room for this ethereal spiritual element to arrive in our being? What would that look like? How could that change our thinking? How could it change this impossible relationship that I'm stuck in, and this crunch I've got at work, or I'm feeling so dull and uncreative and I can't write anymore, or my music's not coming through me, or I'm just not a creative. I don't even award myself that label. What could happen if we clear out those thoughts and really see what letting go of them might feel like? That gentle release with the exhale, imagining that they're dying, imagining that that part of us can die. What can come in? So, how permanently fascinating is that? It's effervescent. It has life forever, that question. And so what better study could there be than that, ever? It's like, I remember in my 50s saying to a lady, I'm on my journey to mastery, I'm interested in kingship. And she said, well, do you know that all the mastery of life still leads to the mystery of death? So keep it in proportion here, Don't think that you can accumulate knowledge and that changes anything other than your ability to be present. And that wonderful reality of each breath. You can't breathe into the next moment, and you can't breathe into the one that just happened. So you can only breathe into the present. So I believe I believe that is our quickest ticket to presence, is to breathe consciously.
Yeah, I really have to say that this is also sometimes how I put it. In any spiritual practice, we're always looking for this kind of moment, like presence, coming into the now and experiencing that. And how can we actually do this? And I always say that within this human existence, in all this practice, might it be meditation, yoga, other forms of spiritual practices, or even like taking psychoactive substances, there has never been anything that made it like that came so close to this feeling of being connected, being present in the now, and getting out of those thoughts, like having all those questions. I had questions that I got answers to through feeling. There was no rational answer to it, but I felt the answer through breathwork. And it was just like so beautiful. And like you said, also having a release, being able to really let things go and feeling how they fall off my body, how my body's just letting go of them and they're not needed anymore. And it feels so much lighter. So yeah, to me, it's always just amazing to have this tool and to be able to, whenever I want to, and whenever I have the time, to connect to it and really feel that nothing else is needed in that moment. And also like being somehow like a little baby, yeah, in a way. I've had experience where I was going like from screaming and shouting to crying and laughing within a few seconds or within a few moments, yeah? like I sometimes observe with a little baby, and you go like, what's going on? I mean, like the last moment it was just like crying, and now it's super happy, but then going through this emotional waves myself is like, okay, this is what's actually present, and it feels beautiful.
Yeah, I do. I really feel that opening to our emotions is access to a meaningful life.
And I think you said somewhere, you said it quite beautiful. I get to hold space for people to love themselves. Do you feel it's something that's needed at the moment?
Oh my goodness. My God. Oh God. Yeah. That's, if I had, if we, I've done podcasts before, and the last question is, well, what would your message be? And that's what my message is please don't waste time anymore. Please just uncover to love. Just uncover to love. We know that in the last moments of our life, that's the most important element that exists. And perhaps that's why grief is such a beautiful experience, why it has such beauty in it, because it contains love. And yet we just keep sidelining it, just like the breath. We keep sidelining it. And it's in us, it's in each human being. We share this same ocean of pure love. So please let us not waste more time and take the next step. What would that next step be? To being love.
So how much is this now part of your journey, that you've said like how it took you throughout your life to experience all these different states that you've been through, and the journey that you've taken? Do you feel for yourself now there is no more time to waste?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, to go into this more, a dear friend of mine used this phrase that, well, first of all, we need to get to unconditional love, right? We need to get to agape. That's really what our greatest human sacrifice has been, is that we've sacrificed that. We've followed the mind into all kinds of turmoil that it's led us into. And so the process that I help people with is which identical to my own. It's no different than my own inner process, which is about learning to love those parts of me that are unlovable, that I feel shame about. And that is that beautiful sentence that my dear friend Rick Smith said, which is unconditional love is learning to love ourselves in all our conditions, which is so obvious, and yet an enigma. Unless it's articulated like that. We can say our unconditional love, and we go, I'm going to love anyway, but it actually literally means loving ourselves and each other in all our conditions. So not just the misery and challenge, but the brutal ugliness of humanity that we call ugliness needs to be loved. The people that we vilify and the people that we consider as devilish need to be loved because they all exist inside us. They couldn't exist out there unless they existed in here. So that question that I mentioned earlier on, what is your outer world reflecting to you about your inner being? You know, we know with that wonderful work that David Bohm did as a quantum physicist that suggests, if not proves, that the outer world is a macrocosm of our own inner microcosm. And that means that by going inside into those realms of the self and learning to love those dark parts of our own being, that we then naturally stand up for unconditional love, that we can love that part in other people too. So that's my guiding light in life. That's one of my principles. I mean, each time we're triggered, you know, each time the finger is pointed at us for something we don't like about ourselves, it's an opportunity to go in there and find a way to love it.
When you said like those moments when you've just been with the breath and when you've suffered this illness and you had to go inside, and then also being somehow divided from the place that you loved so much, Bali and your community, going inside, and now you're going back into building a community. Can you tell a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, that is huge. I can't. We're building a community. It's called ASHA, which literally means Alchemy School of Healing Arts, but in Sanskrit also means hope. And our intention is to catalyze a new form of life, a virtuous circle of activities that are and a community that feeds itself and nourishes itself. And it's a big project. I mean, there are only 22 people here right now, but already you see the human condition play itself out.
Tell us a little bit more about, like you said, like 22 people are here right now. Where's here and what are you doing?
We're in southern Tuscany. We're on the southern flank of Monte Amiata, which is an extinct volcano. It seems to be a thing of mine to always be living on the side of a volcano. But it's a very powerful place. It's only about 20 minutes away from where the Dalai Lama comes when he comes to Italy. It's known as a power spot, and we are on a piece of land of about 30 acres so far, but we're accumulating more as we move forwards. And we're underneath a village that is actually under inhabited. It used to be a mining town, and then after they stopped mining about 25 years ago, the kids left. They kind of went off to bigger cities for bigger lives. And so it really consists of mostly old people, a few young families, but not many. And they're dying off, you know. So this town of 4,000 people is down to about 750 or so. And so my vision is to regenerate the town in the kindest and most honoring way possible to the local culture, and to create local light industry for the kids so they have a reason to come back to their town, and at the same time to borrow a little bit from the Ubud model of nomads, so to encourage people who've been traveling, who are looking for a place to rest, digital nomads, and that new blood, that new life that was always resurgent in Ubud, to invite that to happen here as well. And it all begins with the retreat center as we have it right now, which is ASHA Retreat Center, which is about 10 or 12 buildings on this piece of land. It's like a little village. You kind of walk down little lanes and you find another building. It's very, very pretty, very sweet. and had been abandoned for many years. So we've only been back here a month. We got delayed because of COVID, but now we're here and we've got these wonderful volunteers who have come to do what they can to help us put it into some kind of shape, into some kind of condition, so we can then use it as a community centre. So, and there are many empty buildings. So we've got people coming to rent houses, we've got people coming to buy houses who want to restore them. So part of my past comes back and becomes reincarnated. And so we want this to become, the intention is for this community to become exemplary, as an exemplary way of living, an eco community, zero impact, and replicable. So we're being looked at by some fairly big backers potentially who we don't need, but could help us create something that could be replicated in other parts of the world as a new way of living. So we're opening a foundation in about a month. I'll be starting a foundation devoted to the regeneration of the town, and also into the development of a structure that is replicable. Parts of it will be culturally individual, but parts of it will also be replicable. So how could this work in India, or how could it work in Peru, or how could it work in New York State, or in any culture? What is it that is modular and can be exported and taken elsewhere? And also, how does a community of this, what happens if you only get 10% of the way and it stops and we can't travel anymore? What happens if, with all the potential unfolding that's happening in front of our eyes, how do we manage that kind of a situation? So those are the macro elements, and the virtuous circle that I talked about is a foundation which feeds local industry and invests in local industry and gets a return from that industry and then reinvests in more industry, and so it can really become a capital of a new paradigm. And at the same time, we have our ASHA online work, which is how can we reach, I know from my experience wanting to create this community for 25 years, I've been working on this concept, and with the success that we've had with Alchemy of Breath, we now have a model that is usable, and we want to create an ASHA online platform. We are creating now an ASHA online platform that will be about platforming people who have important messages to bring to the world, but they don't have the skill to know how to do the marketing or the back end or the business or the entrepreneurial aspects. But we do. So the idea is to share that so we can really bring out some new thought and new leadership into the world. So that will be a social enterprise, but a profit enterprise, and that will feed the foundation, which will feed the regeneration, and then ASHA Online will then feed and it keeps going round. And the idea is that everybody wins. And at the same time, whatever happens on land happens. There are empty houses here waiting to be claimed. So we're putting in place some kind of, we have a code of ethics, very clear code of ethics, which includes the 6 co-commitments, of course, of Gay and Katie Hendricks. Recommend you Google them, everyone, 6 co-commitments, and read them. And so we have a filtration process in place that we want to encourage people who are absolutely willing to bring more than they take, and are willing to take 100% responsibility for their own lives. So it's a non-socialist system. It's not like Auroville, but it's a bit like Auroville in India, and it borrows a bit from Findhorn and a bit from Damanur and a bit from different communities that we've studied and are still studying, Tamara, other communities. But we want it to be non-isolationist. We want it to be inclusive. We want people to have their own livelihood, and we want everybody to have a healthy, growth-orientated environment. So, in a growth-orientated environment.
Hi, this is a little note from your host. I'm super grateful that you are here and listen to our conversation. If you enjoy the show, why not become a member of Retreat Affairs? There's so much more content than in this free episode. As a member, you will get access to the full interview. You will be able to read the transcript and have the links to everything that was mentioned throughout the show. But most importantly, you will help me to keep the podcast going. I started this as a project that's close to my heart. I'm passionate about retreat affairs, but it also keeps me busy quite a lot. By supporting me, you will help me to dedicate more time to this project and still be able to pay my rent and have some delicious plant-based food between recording sessions. Every bit of support is welcome. And if you feel the love, don't forget to share this with your friends. Thank you so much for your time and your interest. Let's go back to the interview. So you're coming back to a place that you have left many years ago and repair that in a way.
Exactly. This is the place I left 15 to 18 years ago with some I'll never go back there again. But that's the hero's journey, right? I mean, you have to leave what you know, and then somehow you're going to work your way back there to bring the treasure back, right?
Yeah, so it sounds like a beautiful expression of that. Like, okay, you seem to have gone on kind of a retreat, and even if this retreat was many years of going to faraway places like Bali, going on your journey and going first to America, like you said, and then being in so many different places, but then also coming back to a place that it looks like it felt like home already quite long ago, and then realizing that. And to me, it gives this idea that I don't really have to go out there into the world to find my belonging, but if I can go inside and look for it there, there's a good place to start to look, and it's where I can ultimately find it. And then it doesn't really matter where I go and where I see my belonging in the outside world, but as long as I have it in the inside, I can be at home wherever I want to be.
Yeah.
So what are the next steps that you're planning for ASHA?
Well, of course, we have a breath camp. We have an Alchemy of Breath camp coming up in September here, which is the first time we're attempting a land-based breath camp since the virus came. And so we're kind of preparing for it and ready to let go of it if it's not possible for some reason. So that's our next threshold here. And
so what is the breath camp?
Breath camp is where all the people that have been studying for the last 9 months for the training come together to really, it's a debut. So it's like they come out and they come out as facilitators. So they'll be running groups of their own and doing some of the final aspects of the training that you need to be in physical presence for, like learning how to touch the body and things of that nature. So it's a celebration. It's the culmination of this long pregnancy, this gestation period that they've been in. And really, when I say celebration, it's not just because they're finishing, it's because they have gone so deep into their own inner world in order to be able to be here. Sometimes excruciatingly deep in their own inner reflection in order to be able to qualify. You know, the whole principle of this work is that we may be alongside someone that is really suffering, because we tend to the soul. We're kind of like soul shepherds, and there's no way we can be present with that unless we're willing to be present with all parts of our own condition. And so it's arduous, this training period they've been through. So this breath camp is where we all come together, and they some of them seeing each other for the first time too. They've become intimate friends, many of them lifelong friends, but they've never actually touched each other before. So it's this curious, almost like a blind man who's just opened his eyes and is kind of touching a face in front of him. It's a very beautiful, tender moment.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, I experienced it myself in a way. So I've gone through the training, and also going back to what you said before, like how it is possible to become so intimate online and to open up on so many really deep levels and to connect with people. It's just like amazing what's possible, and how we are able to hold space for each other, to heal each other, even through being together, sharing space online, but then also having the power of coming together and actually seeing those faces and bodies like three-dimensional, and seeing even like more than just like the shoulders and the head, seeing like the full person for the first time walking, and it's just not just sitting in this little square on the screen. That's like a really, really powerful and beautiful moment. So like the breath camp that you're planning now for September, will it only be for people that have gone through the course, or will it also be something that's open to the public where people can come?
This one will be probably closed. It may be open, but we don't know yet. But it will probably be closed because it's a soft opening of the retreat center. So it's not going to be perfect. But we do intend in the future to have them open. Yeah, absolutely. We would love to.
And right now, is there any other chance for people to get to see you? Will you be now in Italy for the next few months? Do you plan on going anywhere else? I mean, I know that sometimes you do workshop, you go to different places, travel a lot. Is this still something that's on your mind, or have you decided to just be in Italy for now and focus on that?
Definitely in Italy for now. All workshop schedules have been suspended, not just because of this project, but because of the virus. We just don't know. And of course, it might not be politic to go into a closed room and breathe a bunch of people. So we do what we can, and we go forwards the best way we can.
And what is it? I mean, you said you have 22 people at the moment, 24, and you're going to keep it at that level. But you also told about that there's a way for people, or that you're looking into renting out places. There's a lot of abandoned houses. And
indeed.
Like, how are you planning on handling this? Is there any way for people to get involved, and if people are interested to learn more about ASHA, like what would be a way?
Yeah, there is indeed. They can, if you go to ashacommunity.com, that's ASHA, ASHA, and community, as you would spell community.com. And you can get a look at the countryside and the area and the place itself. And you can read about the vision and the mission. And also, if you want to come and volunteer, we have like a work exchange program that will feed you and keep you here, and you can partake in the lessons and things that we occasionally do a couple of times a week. There's an event we do, like a breathwork, and that's one way that I will breathe people still physically. I love doing it. And you just need to fill out the questionnaire, and then you'll be getting in touch with Nick, who is running that for us. So we do have some slots opening up. I think pre-breath camp, there are a few slots opening up. So, and then post-breath camp on the 4th of October, there are more slots opening up, which will eventually lead up to the olive harvest that's happening at the end of October, and so on. So, and during the winter, there'll be more places opening up because it's cold. So you would want to enjoy the cold rather than you Ibiza folk who are sitting there like I used to going, oh my God, it's 20 degrees and it's Christmas Day. I love it. I'm sitting on a beach.
Yeah, well, I'm still stuck in Germany. I'm on my way back again to Ibiza. Probably like the moment this episode is aired, I'm already back in Ibiza. Let's see. But so what is the, like in terms of the next, probably like let's say like the next 12 months, what would be the plan for ASHA? What's coming up?
Well, COVID permitting, ASHA will become a center of a community center and a retreat center, and it will also have a wellness spa, and it'll be bringing in teachers from around the world pretty much all the time to be able to teach their work. And the community will be opening up some local enterprises. That's part of the foundation's work, is to stimulate people who want to come here and start even the most simple businesses like bus service to the local station, which doesn't exist, laundromat, co-working space, yoga studios, dance studios, whatever it is that wants to happen in the community. We would love to see that happen.
And if people are interested in learning more about the breathwork and connecting with you to breathe, like how could they do that?
Well, the best thing to do is to go to breaththeworldnow.com and then join me on a Sunday. That's the absolutely best thing to do. And just check for more. They're all there on alchemyofbreath.com, whatever is happening. But a good way to come close quickly is just to show up every Sunday at breaththeworldnow.com, and you can go straight to register.
Before we close this up now, is there anything that you would like to add? Is there anything that you need to communicate that you want to put out there in the world?
You see, I already gave you that answer earlier on. So my next best is to say, what would you say, or who would you forgive, or who would you ask forgiveness from if you had 10 breaths left? What would you say, or who would you forgive, or who would you ask forgiveness from if you had 10 breaths left?
That's a powerful question. Thank you, Anthony. It was such a pleasure to have you here on the show. It was beautiful connecting with you, seeing you, talking to you. And I'm really looking forward to hopefully sometime near in the future to give you a hug again, to connect on a physical level. And good luck with everything that you're doing online and offline. And thank you again.
I must be mad. Thank you. What a wonderful life we get to live, that we get to play with things like this and we get to talk of matters of the heart and the soul. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sasha. Thank you all for listening and lasting this long.
Dear friends, this was another episode of the Retreat Affairs podcast, this time with Anthony Abbagnano, the founder of Alchemy of Breath. You can find Anthony on Facebook. That's facebook.com/aob.breathwork. On Instagram @Alchemy of Breath. And you find his new project, ASHA, that's ASHA, at ashacommunity.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google or Spotify, or any other podcast platform. Or head over to YouTube, where you will find us too. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell to be notified about the next episode. One last request. This is a project from the heart, and it would mean the world to me if you would consider helping me to keep this work up and grow the podcast. You can support this work by going to retreataffairs.com, where you can leave a little donation or subscribe to get exclusive content that will only be available to members. Thank you for your support, and thank you for listening.